Well, it's just such bad policy. And can you believe that Julia Gillard is going further than even John Howard was able to do? He put this up and it was a backbench revolt in the coalition that stopped him from doing it. But nothing, it seems, will stop Julia Gillard and no doubt Tony Abbott with her actually taking Australia off the map when it comes to compliance with international law and appropriate treatment of people seeking asylum in our country.
I spoke to Chris Bowen earlier. His concern is that people will try to make that extra journey to the mainland, given the policy, the tough policy that exists now for those that arrive at Christmas Island, Cocos Islands or wherever else, that he's worried they make that extra long journey and more lives are put at risk. You don't see the merit of that argument at all?
Well, I'm also reminded that he thought this was a stain on the national character only a few years ago, and now he seeks to defend this appalling policy. The fact is, under the Refugee Convention, Article 31, you cannot discriminate against people on the basis of the mode of transport on which they arrive, and that's exactly what he is doing. He's saying that if you fly into Sydney, then you have access to legal representation, to proper process in terms of seeking asylum, but if you arrive by boat, you don't. Now
but
that is
the
against
the same for those
the law.
people that arrive at those excised territories. So if they're going to have that policy, wouldn't you see it make common sense that you remove the incentive for people to go that extra step further to the mainland?
Look, I think this is all simply about Labor trying to go out there and say to the community, we are even tougher than John Howard was when it comes to treating people badly, treating asylum seekers badly, and it's because deterrence doesn't work.
So you think it's posturing, not about saving lives?
I think it's totally about posturing. It's totally about the fact that their whole policy has failed completely. More people have arrived seeking asylum since they raced into this policy of so-called saving lives. If they were genuine about addressing asylum seekers, they would have invested that money in Indonesia to assist in the regional assessment. They would have brought people here already from Indonesia.
Which they are doing. They're expanding their humanitarian intake.
They are, but are any of those coming from Indonesia? We've had some arrive from Malaysia, we've had some come from Syria. How many have come from Indonesia, which was, of course, the source of a number of people coming on boats? So let's actually have a look at what we've done so far. And of course, the Greens did welcome and call for the increase in the humanitarian intake, and we continue to do that.
Well, then isn't it incumbent then on the Greens to also now support the government? If you're going to judge the government's policy, isn't it incumbent then to allow the government to introduce the policy? Because they haven't been able to with the Malaysia plan, which you've been vehemently opposed to.
I think we oppose the government's policy on offshore processing that they have introduced. We think that Australia is a big enough country and a decent enough country to uphold international law.
Doesn't that undermine your criticism, though, if you're not willing to let them introduce their policy as it has been put and as it has been endorsed by Angus Houston and his panel? Doesn't it undermine your criticism? Because it's not their full policy.
Oh, we don't support their policy in any shape or form, including their excision of Cocos and Christmas Island. They're sending people to Nauru or Manus Island, and now they're wiping Australia off the map as it comes to the Human Rights Convention. And I think they've really exposed themselves this time, because we have been elected to the UN Security Council in the intervening period. Since the last lot of legislation went through the Parliament, we will now be under increasing scrutiny at the global level. It's already been shown that we haven't put in place any of the protections that the government said that they would do, or that Angus Houston said in relation to mental health provision, particularly on Nauru, for example. We are now seeing the unravelling of that appalling policy position, and the Greens will continue to oppose it outright. What we will support is actually putting into money into increasing our humanitarian intake and also helping the Indonesians to assess people there as quickly and as efficiently as possible, and work with the United Nations to place people not only in Australia but elsewhere.
Just finally though, what do you say to critics of the Greens who argue that we've seen what your policy would deliver, and that is onshore processing and record numbers of boats, when there was onshore processing in place because of the legislative stalemate in the Parliament. That we've seen what your approach would achieve.
And now we've seen what the government and the coalition's approach would achieve, and that is cruelty to asylum seekers but no reduction in the numbers. So with what the Greens had proposed is let's work with the Indonesians to reduce the risk of deaths at sea. Let's implement safety of lives at sea in terms of rescuing people if indeed they do go in boats. That's what the Greens had want in place. What the government have done is said, oh no, we don't accept that. And what they've done is actually have an increase in the number of asylum seekers, increase in the number of people risking their lives, and cruelty now to boot on locking people up indefinitely on Nauru and Manus Island. So all the government has achieved is higher levels of cruelty, dysfunction, mental health, and exposing ourselves in the long run to the humiliation of having to apologise for the appalling way we're treating people 20 years hence when people say, oh, if only we'd known. Well, they do know, it's happening now, and they shouldn't be taking this step of wiping Australia off the map when it comes to international law.
Senator Milne, thanks for your time.
Thanks, Kieran.